Welcome to Next Week's Life. We are very, very fortunate to have two really wonderful people join us from Overwatch. So we have the CEO, who is Kirk Offel, and Joseph Pinzon from obviously Overwatch. And we've had the privilege of having both gentlemen at our Executive Connection Summit 24 just a few short weeks ago. Many of you have been texting me, calling me, writing me, asking me all about Overwatch, and as part of the Hiring Our Veterans program, as well as what the heck Kirk said. What? So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining the show. We're going to have a little bit of fun today. And if you don't mind, I'm going to get kind of into it pretty quick. And I'll start with Joseph. Joseph, why don't you explain to our audience exactly what it is you do at Overwatch and your title?
Great. Thanks, Mike. So, thank you for having us. So, fun stuff. So Joseph Pinzon, I was the chief strategy officer, and now I'm the chief revenue officer. I think the early concept of bringing me in on strategy was to build the organization to a certain point where now we need to focus on taking those strategies and building our revenue. So that's what I do for Overwatch today, Mike.
And if I'm not mistaken, part of your background, you spent a good deal of time in the imaging channel. Is that true?
I sure did. 25 years at Konica Minolta. So, my goodness gracious. So I had an entire career with that company. Great company, put kids through college. So love them for what they were able to do for me in my career. Then I took a little small stint to where I wanted to work in startups. So I went to a fintech. Did that for a short period, and then and now with this great organization, Overwatch, which is still in a startup process. We're coming kind of out of that startup modeling.
So thanks for the background. And Kirk, little bit of background. You are the CEO for Overwatch. So what does that entail, being the CEO for such a very interesting data center company?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And thanks for letting us be on your podcast. It's an honor and a privilege. And again, thanks for letting us come speak to such a diverse group of industry thought leaders like at ECS 24. That was exciting for us. So my day-to-day is really, I feel like I owe a duty to my team to make sure that they're either inspired by what they're doing every day, or they get to be inspired by who they work with. And then it's also my responsibility and duty to make sure they feel safe in this environment that we work in. It's a really kinetic environment. Our industry grows faster and more aggressively than every other industry because of every other industry. And we reinvent ourselves a lot faster, which could put a lot of pressure on people that aren't comfortable with transition. So it's important to put people in a position in which they could feel safe. And I also hire 1/3 of my staff as former military, and with that comes PTSD. So it's really important that we're not triggering these people that have served our country, with distinction and honor. And we feel like they could serve this industry with the same level of character. The other thing that I do is make sure that my team gets to go home fulfilled every day. And they have to be inspired, feel safe, and be fulfilled by what they're doing. And if we don't offer them that, then they wouldn't love us very much. And if our employees don't like us, then why would our clients, right? So we spend a lot of time building culture here.
So for the audience, I really want to make sure that we give a big shout out to Overwatch and to both you gentlemen. We had Dakota Meyer, who just blew it away at the Executive Connection Summit. And if not for the two of you, that could never have happened. So we're eternally grateful for that connection. He was extraordinarily well received, quite a gentleman, and everybody was just knocked out by him. So
yeah, he's a tough act to follow too. He's a huge personality. I challenge you to find someone more purpose-driven and changing, society than him. He's probably one of the most dedicated guys that I've ever met.
Yeah, and I've been a student since of his podcast as well as yours. So again, for all the audience, members, please take a look at Dakota's podcast and all the things that he does, and obviously what Overwatch does. And if I'm not mistaken, both of you are veterans, correct? So maybe you could, Kirk, maybe you can give us a little bit of background. I understand your military career was pretty interesting.
Yeah, my background with the military is dynamic from a lot of respects. I was born and raised on a military base. My father was E1 to O5 in the Air Force, 24 years active duty. Turned 18, loading bombs and F4s, and then came out with a bachelor's from Boise State and a master's from OU. And a lot of hours in the cockpit of a lot of planes. I'm the youngest of his sons. I have a brother in every branch, and I was fortunate enough to get into the submarine community. So I have a technical background with nuclear submarines, and I was on one of those really fun submarines that got to do what submarines are supposed to do, right? So I did 3 deployments, and I did a Northern Ice run. I did counter drug interdictions in the South Caribbean, and I did a med run. And you really learn a lot about the effectiveness of a strong team and what an effectiveness can be for a strong leader, right? It doesn't take much. It just takes a strong person with courage to speak truth to power to be a good leader. And I got to learn that from the submarine community.
So, by the way, submariners have quite their own little reputation, don't you?
Yeah, those people are psychopaths. I always tell people, I'm like, whenever I'm around submariners, I get so annoyed so fast. I'm like, are we all like that? And the reality is we're probably all just a little bit like that. It's like the island of misfit toys, the submarine community.
Yeah, you have my vote. I think you're all like that. So everyone I've ever met looks just like you, sounds like you. And then back to Joseph. So Joseph, your background in the military?
So, Mike, everyone has a function, and Kirk's was very exciting. My function was to make sure guys like Kirk didn't drink too much. So I went to ROTC and got out as a officer in the military police group. And the reason for that is my dad was a Chicago cop and also a brigade command sergeant major in the United States Army, and he needed one of his children to do either one or the other, and I was not going to become a Chicago cop. So I gave him a little police work on that side, and also was able to fulfill that on the military side.
Well, again, gentlemen, thank you for your service. And is your background what led you to helping us with the HIT program and the hiring of veterans? So I know there's a story behind what you're doing. So maybe Kirk, you could give us a little bit better insight as to how you got to this point and why is it such a passion for you to make sure that we get a right number of veterans hired?
Yeah, another great question. So I don't think I fully appreciated what the transition would look like from active duty to the civilian fleet, but it was certainly it took a lot longer than I thought, and it had a greater emotional toll than I could have imagined. And I think that sometimes we tend to make it through shitty situations, and we just kind of try to make it through the other side and keep on moving forward. I come from a community that is, when you make it to the top of the hill, you have to reach back behind you and grab the other person and help give them a hand up. And having every man in my lineage former military, I get the front row seat of what happens, from joining the greatest fraternity in the world. Less than 0.5% of the U.S. population is served in the military. So it is in many ways a really strong fraternity. And you have to remember, a lot of those people that joined the military, they didn't do it to make money. They did it to make a difference. And if you're a young enlisted person like I was, I got to drive a multi-billion-dollar fast attack submarine. It's hard to find significance in the civilian community when you come out of the military and you're not doing things that are life and death. So I gravitated towards an industry that was emerging called the mission critical industry. And the mission critical vertical is measured on downtime. And what would qualify an enterprise as a mission critical production environment would be if they could quantify their downtime by 1 second in either death or a loss of $1 million of revenue. And that industry seemed to catch my attention. It seemed to have a lot of pressure. And submariners have a background of being pressure tested. And it did draw a lot of us into this industry because the attention to detail that's necessary in this industry lent itself to the conditioning that we had in our training to where we could be successful and we could learn a technical thing like this. I think that I got here and I was just trying to stabilize my own career. And once I figured out how amazing this industry is, And I watched as the adoption rate of emerging technology from us, the consumers, grew a greater aggregate demand of power into data centers. I just saw the data center industry exploding. And as it grew a shortage of labor, I discovered that there was another problem that existed, and that was that we had 22 patriots killing themselves every day. And if not us, then who is going to make a change? And it was enough to talk about it. So we decided to make sure that we intentionally and deliberately created programs of employment that made it to where transitioning military people can transition out of what they were doing and back into something that's significant again. Again, they didn't join the military to make money, they did it to make a difference. And I think that if they transition out, if they're unable to find an opportunity that inspires them or makes them feel safe or allows them to be fulfilled, then they're going to commoditize themselves. And many times they do that, they go to the highest bidder for who's going to pay them the most to maximize their overall total earning potential. And in doing so, they sacrifice joy, putting them into a greater risk of doing something stupid like hurting themselves. So we saw that there was a problem with people that wanted to hurt themselves, and we saw that there's a growing shortage of labor that exponentially grows by the month in this industry. And I felt that if I could find an industry like the one that I'm in, which is technology, that not only values their background but needs them desperately. And if I could align these transitioning veterans into an opportunity within the technical vertical where they feel significant again, they're less likely to hurt themselves. And it's financially accretive. It pencils out. You find that these people that would transition, they're transitioning out of the military for the same reason they did when they went in, and that's to make a difference. And they want to be significant, and they want to work for a company that's making a significant change to the world. And I think that this industry and technology itself is the greatest industry to offer them that opportunity.
Well, I share your passion for uh, finding purpose and opportunities for the transitioning military and the veterans. I've been a huge advocate for supporting hashtag 22. It's unacceptable by any definition. And so your work is beyond admirable. It's effective.
I think you need to get Jake Schick on this show. He's the founder of 22 Kill, which has now been branded to the One Tribe Foundation. But Jake Schick is one of the most inspirational people you'll meet. Former Marine, he's spoken on DCAC stage before, just like Dakota Meyer has. But he's an expert. If you know his story, he's a very inspirational person with an inspirational story, and he's another person I'd introduce you to, because the 22 number has to be reduced. And if not us, then who's going to do that?
Well, I'd be honored to have him on the show. I am familiar with his story. Love to meet him. So if you ever have an opportunity to pass this along, please do.
Consider
And and I think the other thing too, Joseph. So again, the connections are always uncanny to me. The irony. So I spent 19 years of my career at Minolta before I ventured on to my next parts of my career. So you and I share that. You've been in the business and you understand it pretty darn well. And when I say Doug Patassi, you know who that is.
Mm-hmm.
So the commitment to hiring people is what brought you to us. And then you went to ECS. What was your reaction? That's the first time you went to ECS for both of you. So the question's the same. So Joseph, what was your takeaway? What did you think?
You know, what was really interesting was the opportunity to have a conference that's similar to this new industry I'm in here. The data center industry is unique in the sense that their conferences, especially ours, drives a connection, a unity of everyone who's working in the industry. It's not customer driven. It's not supplier driven. It's the basically the industry and the market drives these conferences, and you leave feeling good. It's almost like therapy because everyone's experiencing the same thing. We're all operating in the same market. And so what was unique for me was to see this for the first time in the high tech or the office product industry. You know this as much as I know, Mike. All of the conferences are product and customer driven. And they are not, the conferences are not to build our ability to either improve ourselves, either physically, mentally, or spiritually. They're not candidly driven to increase our ability to succeed and understand the trends of the industry. We're hoping that our distributors or our manufacturers provide that information. So for all of us to have best practices shared, creating new introductions to emerging technologies, I think is fascinating. And so I felt very good to see that and keep it up, because it's a hugely it's as far as I'm concerned, it's necessity. It's a requirement for any industry, and you've done a good job with that, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And again, the mission is not just float all boats for one event. It's float all boats for everybody every day. To make sure that we're doing the best we can to share knowledge and best practices and whatever. So thank you, for picking that up. And Kirk, I'd like to know what your first impression was from everything that we do. We're not transaction based. It really is about helping make sure that if it's good for one, it's good for all. And if you can't come to the event with that attitude, you're not allowed in. So we just make sure we're focusing on it. But you got up on that stage. You didn't really know anybody. You didn't really have any experience in our channel or our industry. And you took it on good faith, hopefully, like you said, with Joseph and myself, to come and participate. You gave a hell of a message. And if I were going to sum it up, it's like, guys, gals, guess what? Power is an issue. And all of a sudden, everything cascaded out of you. And what would you add, or what would you want to emphasize from the message you gave from the stage?
Yeah. Okay. There's a little bit of, let me paint with a broad stroke to answer that if I could, and to dovetail into what Joseph was talking about. That was my first ECS 24. I found the positive energy there somewhat infectious. That's what made it easy for me to get on a stage and talk to a bunch of strangers that I've never met and talk about something that may have been the first time that they've been introduced to that aspect of technology, right? We're all in the technology game. If I use a term like cloud, it's a pretty prevalent term. The audience there knows the cloud from their perspective, and I know it from mine. And when you're talking like that, it's hard to go high, wide, and deep at the same time, right? Because my objective in that very short narrative that I gave was not to make anybody a PhD on anything, but to simply poke them, hopefully in a way that they realize that there's a whole nother aspect of this industry that is below the waterline. And sometimes we tend to just look at the element or the aspect in which we approach the industry as just the tip of the iceberg. It's what we see. But there's so much that goes on below the waterline. And that's the part that I was trying to introduce and expose. And I spoke pretty fast, and I spoke with pretty broad strokes, right? But if you want me to break it down and get a little bit more granular, I'm happy to do that now. It's just that audience at that time felt like what they needed wasn't a deep dive into things. They just needed to be aware that there's a lot more that's happening below the waterline right now.
Hello. Hey, I have to apologize. This conversation has been so great. We're taking it a little bit further. We're going to make it a little extended because the content is so wonderful. So, Kirk and Joseph, we thank you for everything that we talked about already. And we're going to just segue over into part 2 of Next Week's Life. So, thanks, Kirk. Thanks, Joseph. Talk in a minute. Bring us a little granular. I think it's a great opportunity to share more information. You teased them from the stage, and I know everyone wants to know more.
Well, what I was trying to introduce people to was a concept that is based on the tenets of the 5 industrial revolutions. We're in the 5th industrial revolution now, and I'll give everyone a brief overview of the 5. So the first industrial revolution was most unique because that happened during the same time frame as the American Revolutionary War. And during that time, we had a whole series of presidents, some of the ones that are most prevalent, obviously, like George Washington, but we had an introduction of technology really for the first time. And the first stage of technology that had the most significant impact on humanity would have been the steam engine or steam power, right? And steam power is the theme of introduction between every industrial revolution. So during that first industrial revolution, they gave us amazing technologies like steam power or the cotton gin. But there's other technologies that are introduced, right? Like the Colt revolver is an example. And every time that there's an element of technology that's introduced to us during an industrial revolution, there's always a period of there's always unintended consequences, we could say, right? So some of the unintended consequences of those days would have been like, um, well, how many people probably died in those days to a Colt revolver, right? That's a piece of technology, right? How many people die today from a Colt revolver? And technology will always have an unintended consequence. How many people have died today due to social media? Maybe the bullying that takes place on social media. But every time that there's a level of introduction of new technology, the pendulum swings almost a little bit too much. It over rotates. And then in the next industrial revolution or in the next chapter of time that follows it, we tend to rotate back. So it's like Goldilocks, too hot, too cold, and eventually it'll become just right. And we tend to catch our breath during, during the following industrial revolution. So in the first one, we got power, and we got other things that came with that. There's unintended consequences that came with that, including this new urbanization of communities where we started having large, factory workforces, and we started having, we had child labor laws because we had people, we had employees or employers that weren't protecting their employees. And then you had people that were working way too much without breaks, right? Or we rolled out all these cool jobs to build things, and then we had to find a way to reel it back and figure out how to protect the workforce, right? And then we had a 30-year break between the first industrial revolution and the second. We had a 30-year break, and there's a few things that happened during that time frame. And during those time frames, like when we have the most disruption in war, we tend to have less industrial revolution. And during that time, the break between the first industrial revolution and the second was the Civil War, right? And during that, we had a lot of things that got introduced in concept, like, believe it or not, the combustion engine was built then, but it wasn't until the second industrial revolution where we started adopting electricity as well as motor power or motor engines, or the combustible engine for power. So again, in the second industrial revolution, they give us some form of technology, and then the pendulum shifts a little bit to where we're fixing something from the previous industrial revolution, but we're taking something a little bit more mainstream. And then when we get between the second and the third industrial revolution, we had an even larger break, right? Because you had World War One followed by Prohibition, which led into the Depression, which led into World War II, which led into Vietnam. And during that time, the greatest innovation potentially we saw was the nuclear weapon, right? So we started getting closer to this concept of nuclear power. Whether it was being weaponized or used for energy was not yet fully vetted out, and it took years. But in that third industrial revolution, which began in 1969, think about the social conformities and the social constructs. Like, I was born in the mid 70s, 75. Well, guess what was emerging that was very popular, very vogue, very faddish in those days? It was convenient food, whether it was frozen food or TV dinners, or was what we've referred to today as fast food. And I don't think anybody would have understood the impact that fast food would have on our own health, or the health of our family, or that of the community we live in, or the society in general, or humanity overall. But the burden that the healthcare industry places on our economy is easily quantified, right? But we also, I grew up in that time when they were still, 4 out of 5 doctors would tell you that they smoke, Camel Lights, right? So now you'll never see advertisement for that type of stuff. But we introduce things to the world, and then we adjust to them in a way that's healthier for us. So we had workout videos, and during the third industrial revolution, we also got nuclear power, right? So in the first, we have steam power, steam engines. Second, we had motor engines and electricity. In the third, we got nuclear power, and we started getting into compute power. Computers were still in their infancy, but we started getting into, space exploration. In the third industrial revolution, we mapped our own genetic code, right? So we can map DNA. And that industrial revolution lasted from 69 to 2000. So right at the collapse of the dot-com bubble, we stopped, and without a break in between the next industrial revolution, we rolled right into the fourth industrial revolution. The fourth industrial revolution gave us more power. Okay, it gave us AI, AR, VR. It gave us quantum computing. And not only can we map our own genetic DNA, we could edit it now if we wanted to, right? And like every other time before that, we would get some great things from an industrial revolution or even the gaps in between. And then we'd have to spend the next industrial revolution or the next chapter of time trying to find a healthy balance with whatever was introduced to us. So I'm a person that never really relied on social media at all. Outside of my LinkedIn, I refused to use it because I didn't want algorithms tracking me and I didn't want everyone to know everything about me. But today, I use it differently. And that's because at the end of COVID, around 2020, we closed the fourth industrial revolution and we started the fifth. And the objective and the purpose of the fifth industrial revolution is for us to catch up. What we've learned is technology as a whole, it evolves way faster than the human biology, right? So we humans now are burning ourselves out and we can't even get it even in some of the responsibilities and stressors that we introduce into our lives, let alone get ahead. And what we're learning is we have to use the technology and the machines in our life in a much harmonious way, in a healthier way. And that's what the fifth industrial revolution is about, is for that pendulum to shift back to where we're still going to be focused on power, but it's empowering us humans to have, like I use Instagram now, but I use it to find all the best cooking recipes I need for maintain the diet that I want, which because it understands what I'm trying to do, it feeds me workout ideas. And because it knows I'm working out, it'll send me ideas on stretching and recovery. It'll also send me products for like hydrogen bottles for water. Like I've used it to not only send me the things that are most secretive for me, but now I could get, romantic inspiration from Mark Anthony to something, some post about something that's stoic that tells me what it's supposed to be like to be a man in these days, right? So the technology is also something that's being used in a way that's less addictive for me, right? So I think that society as a general, coming out of COVID, there's been almost an awakening. The technology is giving us access to larger volumes of aggregate information that we as consumers can use to determine what we want to do that makes a healthy balance in our lives. And the example I'll give you is you could eat fast food 3 meals a day right now, but you don't probably. But I'm not saying you don't ever eat it, but you don't do it 3 times a day because it would make you unhealthy. And I think that people are realizing that the fast food rectangle that they have in their hand is also something that they have to moderate themselves with and have a healthier, more harmonious relationship with, so that they're using their phones to figure out ways to de-escalate stress instead of using the phone as the primary vehicle to escalate it. So I just think that there's a lot of changes that are taking place, and the adoption rate of emerging technology is so great that it's going to force something that's even greater in the fifth industrial revolution, and that is a tipping point in economy. So if our economy is based on fossil fuel and dirty coal and energy like oil, what's going to happen when the number one or the most valuable commodity in the world now is data, and we live in a digital economy? And I think that what you're going to find is we will want more technology in a healthier way than ever before, and AI will help create that, because generative AI, I mean, we created more data last year than in the history of the world combined. And every year you could say that it would just rotate out 18 months, then 24 months, until eventually the adoption rate of things we're counting, how it took 5 days to get ChatGPT to 100 million users. So the beauty is as we grow more mature as a technology industry, you'll see us start acting like a more mature industry. And what I mean by that is you'll see policy being created by those that originally started this industry. We're in a technology industry that's the equivalency of starting the automotive industry right now. We work today amongst the Henry Fords that created and pioneered this industry that prior to 25 years ago never even existed, and they're beginning to sunset. And those people will sunset into roles that define policy, and that policy will be predicated on ethics. If I was going to be a doctor, I would go to a whole year of medical school or law school focused on ethics. And in this industry, we don't do any of those things because we're so new. But as this industry becomes more mainstream, as there's a greater awakening thanks to you and people like you, people are going to understand not only the technologies in their world, but how it impacts them and where they fit relative to the ecosystem of technology. And they'll realize there is a lot that we need to do as individuals to make changes. And I think that if we make more ethical changes at the front end of technology, then what you can have is, think about it like this: the longer that we've been able to condition society to tolerate a level of mediocrity that's unhealthy for us, the longer it takes for us to break that habit. So if AI is adopted in a matter of days, it takes a matter of days now to unpeel or deconstruct or de-escalate some sort of unhealthy relationship with it. The longer it sits over the plate, the longer it takes for us to heal from it. The shorter it takes for us to adopt it, the faster we could also rotate back off of it into a healthier way. I think the fifth industrial revolution should be something of hope. And I think hope should be recognized in the shifting of economies based on power, because now we've realized that this is an untenable technology market and it's scaling at a rate that none of us could predict. And the only renewable, reliable, and safest form of power that could support the aggregate volume of demand that's being driven by technology today will be nuclear. And I think that once we go into nuclear, I think that will be the greatest change of climate that you've ever seen. When we stop using fossil fuels to plug in Teslas and we start using rail systems based on small modular reactors to do that, you'll see that our carbon footprint will be reduced significantly.
So that was brilliant. I mean it. That's absolutely brilliant. I appreciate that picture. And the interesting thing, and I'm not a technical person, so I don't have an engineering background.
Me
We
neither.
built software stuff and we made it work before I sold my company. But you touched on something that I think, well, two things that jump out as a layman. Number one, ethics. So there isn't a class for ethics.
That's why we have so many unintended consequences behind what we do, is because we're not measuring it 5 times before we cut it. But if you operate like that in the legal system or the medical or healthcare system, it would never work. This industry is going to be more mainstream. And 2024 will be the year in which everyone will know what data centers are, because they're the engine under the hood. They're the sky for the cloud and the home of AI. But people don't realize that yet. Once they know, and it's a much more prevalent term, then you're going to see it become a more mainstream industry. And with that, you're going to see regulators and authorities having jurisdiction that are going to come in and be like, hey, we need to make sure that we're doing things that don't have a negative impact on society, right? Like it's no different than any other technology. Putting beers in cans and shipping it in trucks to where it's easily adapted by everybody else, that's a form of technology. But alcohol is one of those things that it measures in the death scale how many people die from that every year versus how many people die. I'm talking about drunk driving accidents versus killing themselves due to bullying on social media, to handgun. I mean, you could track all these things, but we just need to have a part of the industry that's now so focused on that we're making less mistakes and it's less iterative to make these changes.
Well, there's an awareness or lack of awareness, I guess, depending on your perspective. But so there's a fear factor about ethics, right? Huge fear. And if you play that into today's world, the fear is also, I think, emanating from the lack of understanding about what technology is really capable of doing. So when you look at, you mentioned quantum computing, and as part of the fourth, I think, revolution, right? And that might shock a lot of people, but we're in this fifth one, and there are no limitations on quantum computing or AI. And it might be the first revolution where it's being self-developed. So when you're talking about steam engines or combustion engines, or these are man-made functional things, maybe unintended consequences, but they can only go as fast or furious as a human being can develop it. And I think one of the things that I keep hearing in my world is how on earth is quantum computing? Everybody realizes whatever's coming with quantum computing is going to make AI look like, slow walk.
Yeah, I mean, you might as well be talking about flux capacitors right now, right? Because if people don't even understand cloud well enough to be talking about AI, let alone quantum and anything that's beyond that. And I think that AI's focus now is because there's 2 major limiting factors to the growth of AI. One, let's remember that AI is designed and built by people, right? By humanity. And there are some people that build code that don't really love humanity. So some of those people that build code live in markets that you can measure how much they like humanity. Go to San Francisco and walk around some of the areas down there and you'll see it's like a zombie apocalypse. Well, that's the same town where the people that reside in the technology space live, and they're the ones that are writing AI. So there's going to be some challenges as we ring out the lack of objectivity in AI. And I think the capacity for quantum is one of the things that will allow certain things to break through. Um, but you also have the greatest limitation for AI, which is power. And to put it into perspective, as I was telling your audience when I was on stage, if I were to chat GPT one question right now, it would draw so much power of compute power to answer that question that it would be the equivalency of me charging my cell phone from 0 to 100% 60 times. That's how much power is required to answer that question. And people don't realize that, but when you are drawing power, you're generating heat, and the only way to we have to reject that heat through a cooling system or a mechanical permutation, which typically uses some sort of fluid, most likely water. It takes a 16-ounce bottle of water to reject that one question. So when people are wondering what their kids are doing upstairs, leaving the bathroom light on or some, that's not nearly as bad as their kid upstairs chat GPT and their questions for their history assignment, for the next 2 hours. That's a huge power demand that's being driven. And what's going to happen is, and this is the tipping point that's going to happen, we're in the gold rush, the data center gold rush of 2024 just started. And over the next 3 years, it's supposed to be think about this. We had the Internet of Things, or IoT, which was the initial genesis behind why we even created these cathedrals that serve as the sky for the cloud by being these major hotels that instead of renting suites out to individuals, they just rent out suites to the global Fortune 1000 or the G1K that'll come in and rent power, space power and cooling in a secure way from a building, knowing that they don't have to worry about that. They worry about everything else in the back end of that app, right? And maybe if they're the airline industry or the automotive insurance industry, they are in the business of doing that. But the primary line of business that data center operators use to generate revenue is the space, the power, and the cooling. So they're going to focus hard on that. And what we feel is that there's such a massive demand for power now that we don't have IoT, which started this industry, was eclipsed when we met the cloud. And the cloud was 10 times more aggressive than the Internet of Things. And AI is no less than 10 times more aggressive than cloud. So if we don't even have enough grid capacity to support cloud's demand today, because we're as an industry almost out of capacity in every NFL cities when it comes to power, what's going to it's going to push all these data center companies into the secondary and third tier markets, which will connect the fiber backbone of the United States like a hub and spoke, and it pushes more out to what they call the edge. But what's going to happen is it's going to force us, once we realize that force to the edge is just a gobble up of stranded capacity from transmission to distribution on a backplane in some state that doesn't have a huge industry drawing power. But in the meantime, that's where we're going to start collecting all the leftovers of power throughout the grids, while it gives us time to put a really solid plan for nuclear online. So in 10 years from now, we have a true solution for climate change and a true solution for the demand of power. So next time you're plugging your Tesla in, it's not using 95% dirty coal to recharge it. It's using a much more reliable and safer form of energy, which would be nuclear. So you're going to see these big changes, but AI can never be fully unleashed because the adoption rate of that technology from us, the consumer, let alone what we do from business perspective, doesn't. It's impossible to be unleashed because we don't have enough power to support it, except in really tiny pockets and in limited doses.
That is, again, I'm going to use the word, that's brilliant. I think I've never heard a summary of some of the more salient issues, the critically important issues, articulated as well as you just did. So,
Well, if you open the bar at ECS 25 at 10 o'clock in the morning before I take the stage, I'll probably be able to knock it out of the park next time. You just have to have the bar open a little bit earlier before I talk.
Okay, that works well. And which actually, to walk across the bridge, in Joseph, I think you know this pretty well. So you've got what Kirk just talked about, which is really incredibly important to our industry, given all the power consumption and all the tools that we're using. And then the flip side of that is I see our industry stuck still with 20, 30, and 40-year-old technologies, right? And not moving fast enough. So if you were gonna translate this for a dealer or for Sharp, what Kirk just said, what would you tell them? Hey, get off that old stuff. What's the message here?
So depending on what their solution set is. So if they are selling retail cloud services, I would be slightly concerned for two reasons. What Kirk's explaining is there's more demand than there's supply. And so, basic economics, unless we solve for this quickly, is your cost is probably going to go up significantly. And then your customer's cost to compute or to use the cloud is going to come up significantly. That in itself probably will generate it. I mean, we're resilient business people, so it'll create an opportunity to still compute, but without the maybe using a cloud, and this will push things back to the edge. And so I remember at Konica Minolta, it was very important for us to start to sell edge technology. I think it was way ahead of its time because we didn't have this problem. But eventually, we're going to get to the point where solving for or computing at your local station or at the edge will probably be a solution. If I'm in the dealer space, I'm looking to expand that solution set. If I have a labor force of technicians, I'm looking at how can I deploy my labor force to support the growth demands that Kirk's mentioning. We he'll talk to the fact that data is now equal to gold in the sense that it's a currency that we're going to be working in. And so, if I'm in the dealer space and I have all of these customers, I'm looking to diversify my portfolio of solutions that partner with the trends and of emerging technologies, opposed to forcing or continuing to sell what we have, in our bag. So, I'm not sure if Kirk wants to expand on that, but that's where I would look.
Yeah, and as we transition back to Kirk, that's good input. The one thing that I find is that if a dealership or an OEM, even a big OEM, right, manufacturing, if they're continuing to use old technology, I have to, and for example, not moving into the cloud, they're stuck on, whatever, fiber, right? So they're using more power and consumption on that old technology. Wouldn't that be a safe assumption? And the faster they can be transitioning over to a better generative AI or some other technology, that's going to benefit them. Wouldn't you say, Kirk? Or am I off?
I think well, it depends on who them are, but let me maybe double tap or zoom out for 1 second. When you think about what the industry, like our industry grows at a double digit CAGR, right? And it has for the last 9 years. And every quarter seems to break a record from the last one, or every year breaks the record from the last year. And it's two things that are happening. It's you have data exploding is the most valuable commodity in the world, but you have the creation of content, the eyeball content, video caching that is rolling through these carrier hotels has never been higher. The volume and velocity has never been higher. So data is growing while simultaneously this industry is procurement teams or finance teams, which are typically pretty armed to the teeth, are becoming more sophisticated of how they make purchasing decisions in technology. They're going to repatriate some of their cloud stuff back to what's called on-prem, right? So we're seeing this really interesting thing where cloud can't build fast enough right now. There's really 10 major companies that every operator in the world is trying to chase down. The top 5 would be FAMGA: Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon. But there are other 5, and these are hyperscalers, and there's other hyperscalers. A hyperscale is a term that's used for any business that spends $1 billion a year on its own infrastructure is considered a hyperscaler. But you could still be like an Uber or a TikTok, or I'm arbitrarily just making examples, and you can still make purchasing decisions at the same volume block is a hyperscaler, but maybe you're a baby scaler, or you're larger than a traditional enterprise. But there are some of these groups that are learning like not everything needs to be in the cloud. So they'll repatriate some of their stuff from the cloud and they'll put that on-prem. And that on-prem requirement is going to have a completely different space, power, and cooling requirement than what they throw into the cloud, right? So you're going to see two things taking place, this explosion of data, but you're really not going to measure the contraction of what is going back to on-prem, because I would say right now, with the massive demand of growth in this industry, and this industry has grown, you could Google it, Google which industry has grown the fastest in the last 10 years, and you're going to see consistently, if data centers aren't number one, they're number two, behind maybe some form of industrial. It could have been like chip manufacturing for all I know. But long story short is every other industry's adoption rate of emerging technology puts a greater demand on this industry of technology that we sit in, which is the data center side. And data centers are going to have a lot of different things that take place. But imagine if only maybe 75% of all data centers today are still on-prem. So with all the cloud we see, and with all the repatriation of cloud plus all the growth of data, 75% of this industry, maybe more than that, still hasn't even adopted a cloud solution. So think about how much growth we have, and we haven't even fully started really running towards cloud. And we haven't started adopting AI, AR, and VR to the extent of which it's possible. So power, it's going to come back to the two existential threats that exist right now in this technology industry, come down to one, talent. We have a huge talent shortage. We're getting ready to experience what is called the silver tsunami. The silver tsunami means in our industry, if it's 25 years old, there's people like Joseph that have already spent 25 years in another industry and are starting over a brand new career in this industry, and he has a lot of longevity. This industry has more than 50% of its labor force that has worked in this industry for greater than 20 years. And some of them are like Joseph. They may have had another career before they even got into this one, and then this is their second career. There's a lot of people in the silver tsunami that know where all the bodies are buried. They were here during the beginning of the evolution of technology, and they're going to ride off into the sunset. Maybe it requires, us getting through an election year where we have a more stabilized economy, and whoever this next person is that comes in to lead the nation ends up turning off a couple wars in Ukraine or Israel, who knows? And maybe they de-escalate the growing, tensions that exist between us and China. You never understand what's going to be the genesis to trigger this silver tsunami. But make no mistake, we're already short 300,000 people just in the industry that I'm in the data center side. And now we're staring down the barrel. Half of our labor force is staring down the barrel of a potential retirement in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. So there's got to be a transfer of knowledge. So talent is the number one existential threat to this industry. Adopting people that can come into this industry and make a significant change is important, and we're going to use technology to do that. But we need to use that same talent and passion that's falling into this industry to be the solution for how we solve for the power problem, which whether it's fission, fusion, hydrogen, it doesn't matter. We need to start figuring out short-term and long-term solutions to get us off of this oil, fossil fuel, oil and gas and coal, and get into a more reliable and sustainable and cleaner form of energy that has the greatest impact on climate change.
It's interesting. A couple of those metrics you shared, they're similar for us, right? So 70% of our infrastructure for our industry is still on-prem. So everyone talks cloud, everyone talks, about all the benefits of cloud and so on. But the truth is, that's still 70% of our distribution.
Just getting started. We are just getting started at adoption of technology. Just getting started.
Yeah, and I never heard silver tsunami, but that clearly fits me. So, Joseph, you're on the cusp. You're on the cusp. So, to just kind of move away from business for a little bit, I'm kind of curious. I always ask this question, Kirk. You're too young. So I was born in 1950. So I think I've been in 3 of the revolutions, or on the cusp of 4. So, and I can remember, when my father and, all the guys were coming back from World War II, and I can remember all the stories, and I can remember, my family coming from Italy and all those various different things. I've never seen anything like this before. This is absolutely mind-boggling. And so the way you just spoke about that, I'm extraordinarily grateful for. I think it clarifies a lot, not just from a technology perspective, but I think overall from an ethical perspective, even touching on political. Ultimately, all these things are they're going to merge. So that's awesome. On the personal side, I'm sure you don't even know who Frank Sinatra is, let alone have a Sinatra song.
So my old man's a retired aviator, right? So he was an Air Force guy, and you could always tell when there's an aviator in the room, right? Because he'll tell you. And when my dad would have all of his sons home, he'd always make big steaks. Steak night at the Offel house, you couldn't even begin to eat until he went over and he put Frank Sinatra on the radio, and then he'd sit back down at the table and then we could eat. So to this day, my kids grew up where when it was steak night, like everyone just shut up for a second. We got to go put Sinatra on. Nowadays, I don't have to walk to the stereo. I just tell Alexa to do it, right? But yeah, Frank Sinatra is the steak. That's the official steak eating night at my house. It's nothing but Frank Sinatra.
Awesome. You just did my heart gold. Thank you.
Who doesn't know who Frank Sinatra is? Chairman of the board.
Yeah, he is the chairman of the board. So let's see if Joseph has a favorite Sinatra song.
My Way. That's his.
It is, or Good Life. It was a Good Life. Those are my two.
Yeah, that's the two great choices. So obviously, another quick question in the world of my era. So when you look at the, I'm a fan of baseball. So who's your not current baseball, but let's say the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. Did you have a favorite baseball player?
That's a Joe question.
It's a Joe question?
It has to be. I mean, this guy played baseball in college. His daughter.
That's true. Okay, that's true.
Well, listen, I am like it or not, I'm a Cubs fan. So we believe in if we win, that's a bonus, right?
Yeah.
Because they've created such a awesome environment for us that again, a win is a bonus, but we'd like to see them win a little bit more often. I would have to say my favorite baseball player, and I think would have been the best baseball player ever, is Roberto Clemente.
Yes, that's mine. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, we lost him, but Roberto was definitely one of the best, if not the best.
Yeah.
So I'm going to close out with a very probably unfair question. So you've been gentlemen, and the information is just wildly important. But when you're looking at the jobs that you're doing today, and not necessarily going backward too far, is there one thing that you regret and you say, geez, I wish I hadn't done that? So Kirk?
Not a single one. Like I've never learned a single thing from a single thing I've ever done right. I've only learned from the things I've done wrong, right? And one thing that you don't know about me is I was blessed. About 16 and a half years ago, I was diagnosed with this really rare form of cancer. And at the time, they had told me that they would only guarantee me 2 years of my life to live. So I changed the optics in the way in which I view the entire world from them. So I lived probably one of the most intentional lives you've ever met. So I spent the rest of the 5 years after that trying to engineer a life to where if I were to be called today and told that I would be dead in 2 years from now because of cancer, I wouldn't change what I'm doing right this second. I wouldn't change what I'm doing tonight or tomorrow morning. So I have zero regrets. I was lucky enough to learn that failure is where growth comes from. And trauma or failure or loss, they affect everybody a little bit differently. For men, it tends to make us harder or make us smarter, right? And for me, I feel like I would have never reached the level of understanding that I'm beginning to get in this industry if it wasn't for all the mistakes I've made along the way.
Well, that is, again, a great story, great part of you and your personality. And I've always found, my wife survived a bone marrow transplant with leukemia. She only had a year and a half to live. So I've always found that people that are challenged by those kinds of things that are just mind-boggling, they come out better. So if they can survive, they're stronger, better, and have a better attitude. So
to add back into that is one of the reasons why we try to hire so many veterans is because I believe that they've been pressure tested in a completely different way, right? And the stress inoculation you have on being in the military starts from the day that you took your oath to protect and defend the Constitution up to and including anything at the cost of including your life.
Yep.
And people that are in the military, they are already in the mission critical world. They just measure it in their own mortality instead of downtime. So people that have had to visit mortality, even in the civilian world, they tend to have a better coping mechanism or a coping skill in life, right? They've been pressure tested. So I think mortality is what helps us really appreciate the things that we have. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Totally. Great answer. Thanks for sharing that with us. So, Joseph, how about you? You have any regrets other than the fact that your golf game stinks?
Mike, and he's my boss, and he's on here on this
I know that
podcast.
you used to be a dancer. I know that. In the silks is what you dibbled in. I got it.
I used to dabble in the silks, and that was a little regret because I'm larger than most of the circus artists, and so when I fall a little bit harder than those guys. No, what Kirk coming over to Overwatch has taught me, which unfortunately I didn't get to learn this lesson because I worked for a large multinational organization, and again, it's nothing bad against them. Is failing was difficult, meaning you didn't want to fail at Konica Minolta. You wanted to make sure that you stayed away from anything to do with failing. And at Overwatch, Kirk has a saying: "We're going to fail forward." So it presents us with the opportunity of coming up with concepts and ideas that we know possibly may fail, but as long as we're failing forward and we're learning from those, we'll succeed at a much better clip than we ever could succeed at a large multinational organization. I always say, coming from a large organization and moving into a startup, and both of these opportunities, is I just got out of a cruise ship and now I'm in a speedboat. And so we're more nimble. We can turn on a dime, and the parable of the gorillas don't exist with startups because there's not enough history there for us all to form an opinion that was someone else's opinion years and years and years ago on how we should go to market. So, I don't have any regrets. I was scared, and I tell people this. I left at 48, 49 years old after 25 years, and I was scared. I felt like it was almost a mourning process because it was part of my life. And will I be able to succeed in the real world of non-Konica Minolta? And I tell everyone my age or about to leave a company to say, leave, because you are the reason why you're successful, and you will be that successful, actually be even more successful when you leave. And so I don't have any regrets at all. Not at all.
Well, those are two great answers. I like when people tell me they don't have any regrets, because if you're living life in a rearview mirror, as the saying goes, you're not going anywhere. And I think and again, Kirk, you say things that resonate with me. So I've always believed, one of the greatest days of my life was the day I took the oath. Another great day of my life was the day I got my DD 214. The worst day of my life is when my wife got diagnosed with, terminal leukemia. Best day of my life is when they said she was going to make it. So you can't have those regrets. You have to, like you said, lean forward, keep going forward, and learn from it. So, gentlemen, I know we're gonna. This was awesome. I could talk with you guys for another 14 hours. So my apologies for imposing too much on your time. But this is a great segment, and I really appreciate the fact that you both gave me your time. Appreciate the fact that you supported us at ECS 24, and I look forward actually to working with you in far greater collaboration with the HIT program and how we can hire more veterans and get that thing going. So I really appreciate your time and energy, and thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.